I should start with this. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So tonight I thought I'd start with a little quotation. There is a book in the Tripitaka called the Udana. The Tripitaka being, by the way, the books of Theravada Buddhism, the sacred books, if you like, for those who are not familiar with that word. Anyway, the Udana is a book of significant utterances. So apparently the Buddha was once in the open air with some monks, and there was obviously a candle or a light nearby, and they kept seeing these insects flying down and coming into the flame. So the Buddha was a great seizer of opportunities and images, and he said something like this. He said, rushing headlong, missing out on what's worthwhile, bringing on one new bond after another, like insects falling into the flame. People are intent only on what is seen and heard. Rushing headlong, missing out on what's worthwhile, bringing on one new bond after another, like insects falling into the flame. People are intent only on what is seen and heard. So this may not seem terribly, may seem somewhat opaque. So I'll try to elucidate it, at least at the level of understanding where I'm at, which is what I think he's saying here is that, the majority of people, frankly, are obsessed with sense pleasures. That's the gratification of the senses is what the life appears to be about. And because of this, they are time and again being drawn towards this flame, which I take to be suffering, dukkha. And their wings are being singed. So they're ignoring what is really worthwhile. They're piling on one new bond after another, and they're falling into the flame like insects. Well, obviously this is from the perspective of an enlightened being. Not an everyday perspective. So what I wanted to really talk about tonight is this whole subject of dukkha, or translated roughly in English as suffering, or unsatisfactoriness. So when we start to talk about dukkha, people don't always react terribly well. Why do you have to be such a misery? My life's okay. I have nice holidays. I have good friends. I like to walk the dog, and we have a good time and so on. And in its own way, all that is true. I don't want to dispute any of that. But often it's not, in spite of all the wonderful, let's say you've got money, you can afford cruise trips and all the appurtenances of the wealthy. Ajahn was saying that some of the people on these, expensive cruise trips in the Caribbean or wherever else, because they don't really know what else to do, they've got all these delights parasites around them they overeat, and they should be in paradise, but yet they end up with a heart attack or some kind of illness, or they have to be flown off the ship in a helicopter. So what is the most common response to dukkha? Well, it seems to be, there seem to be two most common responses to dukkha in our normal, habitual, if you like, not very well-informed responses. And I can certainly see this in myself. The first one is when we encounter unsatisfactoriness or suffering or dis-ease or something is going wrong, which often it does, we tend to blame. So first of all, find someone else to blame. And particularly when we've had our minds sharpened and honed in this modern Western form of education where we're constantly comparing and contrasting and analysing and finding faults with things, then it's very easy for our minds to go out and find fault. And if you listen to the media, you know that day after day they're hunting for scapegoats, there are witch hunts going on, something's gone wrong, the train stopped when it shouldn't, or the NHS broke down when it shouldn't, or some other problem arose, and so they set up a new inquiry or commission to look into it, and they find who's to blame. And the other way that we can blame others. It's very easy. I'm always been very good at that. And then also, if we can't find someone to blame out there, then we tend to turn it in here and blame. It's my fault. If I'm suffering, I've somehow failed. I'm a failure. So I think this is why often in the West we tend to deny. In my opinion, we tend to deny suffering. We don't want to. Oh no, it's not. I'm not suffering. Nothing. Okay, just. And yet, in the corner of the room, there's a white elephant called suffering, which we're ignoring. It's like old age, sickness and death, it's looming over you. But the other reaction to suffering is that we try to deny or leap over it with the prospect of some sense gratification. So somewhere down the road, we can see a sense gratification. And even if we're going through some quite excruciating or difficult times, then we comfort ourselves with the prospect of gratification just down the road, So I was doing this the other week. I had to go to a hospital in High Wycombe to have a colonoscopy, something I wasn't really looking forward to at all. And I had to go 2 days without food, or very little food, and then go through this colonoscopy, which I didn't want to do particularly. But so what was my mind doing? It was saying, well, after the colonoscopy, I didn't say it, when I get back to the monastery, I'll have a really nice cup of tea. So we try to camouflage the reality of suffering through the prospect of gratifying sense gratification, something that we want to consume, or either through the mouth or intellectually or through the eyes or whatever. And the other thing we also tend to do, we torment ourselves by looking for perfection, fulfillment and satisfaction in a realm, in an existence which doesn't yield those things. So we look for the perfect partner or the perfect work of art or the house we want and the holiday, and everything's got to be right. And yet, of course, in a world of what we call samsara, the conditioned realm, where constantly conditions are arising and passing away, everything is unstable, nothing is dependable in terms, as the Buddha was received in Buddhism. Of course things keep going wrong. We never find that ultimate satisfaction, but we torment ourselves by always wanting that, and by saying, oh, it's just around the corner. How many times have I heard my cousin say, oh, this will be the holiday of a lifetime. They were saying it 10 years ago, because I met them in Australia when we were on their holiday of a lifetime. They were saying it this year. But I remember the holiday in Australia when they arrived. This is my cousin Jenny and her husband Richard. Richard had the most terrible ankle condition. He shouldn't have even been in Australia. He could hardly walk. They were driving all around Australia and New Zealand, something like that. It was completely farcical. On the holiday of a lifetime. So that one of the great breakthroughs, if you like, in the Buddha's teaching is that he calls on us, or he recommends to us that we acknowledge and we recognize the fact of, suffering, of dukkha. There is dukkha. And I find this very liberating. I'll tell you why. Because of having been into this blame game scenario where you find, there's someone out there who's to blame for this, and the mind seeks out that person or that organisation or whatever, and then you pin it all on them. If that only wasn't for that, I'd be happy, you see. And if we can acknowledge that there is something called dukkha, there is suffering, it's part of the nature of our lives, of the existence in this conditioned realm, and it's at the beginning of a kind of freedom from that. So the Buddha taught this this first sermon is called the sermon on the turning of the wheel, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and it's all about dukkha. So he meets with these ascetics that used to associate with him before he was enlightened, and he meets with them in a deer park, and he gives them a talk on arrival when they have to greet him. They don't want to greet him, but he's so radiant and he looks so special, they greet him and they make him welcome. And then he offers this talk, and he talks about dukkha, the cause of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. This is what the talk is all about in a number of facets. And he says that dukkha has to be understood, and that by him it has been understood. And then that the cause of dukkha has to be let go of, and by him it has been let go of. And then he says, the cessation of dukkha has to be realized, and by him it has been realized. And finally, the path to the cessation of dukkha has to be developed, and by the Buddha it has been developed. He's discovered it, he's developed it. So all of this can sound to us a bit highfalutin, to the Western ear perhaps it sounds like a philosophical concept, something like that. Something up there, kind of high philosophy that sounds impressive, but in the end, what do you do with it? And in fact, I met someone in Switzerland. He was a very intelligent man indeed, a scientist. He was into something called phylogenetics. So he was a real scientist in a university in Geneva, and kind of an original, sort of authentic kind of guy. And he had discovered Buddhism on his own. No one had taught him much about it. He had come across Buddhism and read many texts and so on, and he'd come up with his own theories about Buddhism, and they really were his own. So he set up this association to do with Buddhism. He was teaching it in an adult education class in Geneva. And then he wrote this constitution for the association, and he sent it to us, or to me, I think, to translate into English or something. Anyway, one of the tenets of the constitution was that it was most extraordinary. We commit ourselves to uphold the Four Noble Truths and to believe in them, something like that. So these truths, although they can sound highfalutin, we don't particularly necessarily understand them easily, but in fact they're meant to be and can be used as a tool for contemplation directly in the moment. So what is the indicator that calls for contemplation? It is the experience of dukkha. So you are experiencing some kind of, what do we mean by dukkha? Of course the Buddha did go into an explanation of what dukkha meant. It meant something like this. It meant old age, sickness and death, birth, old age, sickness and death, then separation from the loved, having to be with the unloved. Do you notice how that happens again and again? You get into the perfect relationship or something and you have to be separated, and be with someone you don't want to be with particularly. Separation from the loved, having to be with the disliked, not attaining one's wishes, and so forth. This is all dukkha. Dukkha encompasses or contains all of these ideas. So the experience of dukkha, we have it all the time, every day, and it can be quite serious. You know, you've been applying for a job and you've been rejected, or some person or organisation has rejected you. You feel a lot of pain. You feel distress. Or it could be something very small. For example, I went to the tea cupboard the other week, and I looked in the tea cupboard. I must have been feeling a bit low, and I saw the kind of tea I didn't like. I felt immense dukkha. And who put that in there? So from the trivial to the quite important, obviously bereavement, loss, this kind of thing is very obvious dukkha. Everything changes, and yet we're often in denial about that. This is dukkha, but somewhere in there, what the teaching is pointing to is that where there is dukkha, there is a clinging, there is a holding on, there is a grasping. And the point of this kind of practice is that if we can recognize dukkha, so that's the first thing, we actually have to recognize it, rather than airbrushing it out, or racing on to the next sense pleasure, or finding some other way to deny it. We have to say, well yes, this is dukkha, this is suffering. So, where there is suffering, there has to be clinging. So it's that sensation of dukkha which is actually an indicator for you. It's something positive. Suffering can be a teacher. Suffering and pain can be a teacher. This sounds extraordinary to us, doesn't it? We want to push those things away. How can suffering be a teacher and pain be a teacher? But within the monasteries we often say that the most difficult person that you meet is your teacher. That person is the one that you should bow down to, the one that you have the real problem with. When I went to New Zealand several years ago, I met an Australian monk there who was living in the monastery, and at least at first we got on reasonably well, but I found out he had various traits and sort of peculiar sides to him, and after a while I get all these sort of residues about his behaviour. And there came a stage where when I saw his flip-flops outside the office or the tea room, I wanted to chuck them into the bush. And when I saw them outside the tea room, I didn't want to go into the tea room. And I look back on this monk with great, believe it or not, with real affection. Because he was teaching me something. I didn't find him easy to get on with, but there's no doubt even though he was confused and somewhat, yes, he wasn't clear about what he was doing with his life, and there was a lot of unhappiness there and so on. And his behaviours weren't always terribly skillful or wise, but he, in spite of all that, the interactions, he was teaching me something. He was teaching me to let go. And again in life we see that people find it very hard to let go. And the kind of examples that occur to me are, for example, I know of a Buddhist group somewhere in Ireland. It's not been going that long. It was set up by 3 people together. But one of them, it appears, wants to control that group. For her it's very, very important in her life. This group means a lot to me, that's what she says, to one of the other original founders of the group. And basically, she wants us to keep to control that group. Now, when you have a group like that, it can naturally evolve. It will change over time. But again and again, we see in such a situation where someone finds some kind of fulfillment through running such a group, they don't want to allow those developments to take place. I've seen it here in other groups in the UK. Or perhaps there's somebody in charge of a monastery who can't let go of that. They feel that the status they get from being abbot is, not talking about Ajahn, is so important to them that they can't let go of it. And because of this, because of the holding on and the clinging, a lot of distortions occur, a lot of suffering arises, which they tend to ignore, because for them it's the most important thing surely is to hold on to this. And then they can be happy or fulfilled. Or whatever. So what do we mean by clinging or by grasping? It's wanting things to be. It's wanting things to be the same, how we want them. If things are threatening to change, or it's wanting some kind of gratification. It's out there, the thing that can fulfill me or make me happy. This is the clinging. We hold on to this, we must have it, or we must reject it, we must hold it at bay. Even though all around us, conditions all the time are changing, the whole realm of samsara, the conditioned realm, is like an ocean of waves rising and falling, rising and falling, rising and falling, and in the end there's no way we can control it. And yet, because of our strong craving, we want to control it. We want to manipulate and make things in a way that will suit us. So this is clinging, this is grasping. And there are apparently 4 kinds of clinging. One is clinging to sense objects. There's clinging to views and opinions. A lot of us are like that, aren't we? I've had a lot of that myself. I can't remember what the other 2 are, but anyway, clinging is a pretty simple concept. So what do we mean by letting go? If there is a clinging, then there has to be a letting go. So when I remember Ajahn Sumedho being asked this question, he was sitting on the Dhamma somewhere and he said, just let go. He did it several times. Just let go. That doesn't mean throwing something out or dismissing it. What it means is some kind of relaxation of the tension around something. We have a particular concept of how things should be, or what I want to happen, or I can go into, it's pretty obvious what I mean, I think. So there is a tension around that in our heart or in our mind. But when we can identify the points of clinging and grasping and holding, it shouldn't be like this, or it should be like that. Can we loosen the tension around that? So it's not like throwing it out or dismissing it, pushing it away or suppressing it, but it's like loosening around it. And then being equanimous with it as things change, or as things have to be the way they are. So we've loosened the tension, and suddenly there's a moment, there's a respite. We're no longer so tense, we're no longer so upset. When we've managed to let go, suddenly there's a kind of feeling of relaxation, or you get a breath of air. There's space. You can feel some kind of cessation of dukkha in that moment. A lightness that wasn't there before. So what is the difference between the place where there is wisdom and the place where there is attachment? The difference is this, that in a place where there is wisdom, things are uncomplicated, they're simple and straightforward. We've managed to let go of all the complications. But in a place of attachment, how do we recognize that? It's very cramped, it's tight, it's complicated, things are difficult. So you can actually, pick up where you're at through the state of being that you're in. If you've managed to let go, things will become simple and easy and straightforward. And what are the aids to letting go? Well, one of the most important aids is anicca, or impermanence. So this is one of the three characteristics of existence, that all conditions that arise come to fruition and then they have to pass away. They cannot go on forever. It's obviously true of people, it's true of civilizations, it's true of mountains and planets and solar systems and the universe, or the part of the universe we're in. Eventually things have to pass away. So if we can reflect on that quality of anicca, we know that things are going to pass away anyway. So if we can understand that, then there's no problem in letting go. Whatever it is we want so badly, or think we can hold on to, is going to pass away anyway. So we can let go. And the other aid to letting go is reflecting on the fact that when we grasp at something, we grasp at no thing. There is nothing there. Because in this tradition we talk about sankharas, or formations, things which have come together and which must in the end break apart and fall apart. And so when we grasp at something, we're grasping at something that isn't even an entity, it's just a condition, it's just come together, a set of conditions that have come together and that will also have to fall apart. It's the law of these sankharas, they come together and then they have to fall apart. So when we grasp at things, thinking that this thing, this entity will make me happy and fulfill me, that's why again and again we find, oh, it's changed, oh, it's let me down, oh, it hasn't worked out. No, there it is again, more suffering. Whereas if we can be at ease with the flow of how things are changing, that is the art of living without suffering. Can we let go of those expectations? And the way to do this is to come back into the moment, the present moment, like I I hope we are doing on this retreat. So we come back into the present moment, and we're using the breath, we use the sound of silence, we use whatever particular technique we're working with, and coming into the present moment, we can see clearly what's arising in the moment. When we see clearly, it's no longer pushing us around, we can let go of it. We can recognize how to respond to that particular mind state or emotion or craving or need or whatever is arising in the moment. So it's through coming back into the moment that we can let go of these things. And we recognize that the things that which arise in the mind come to fruition and pass away. So we employ these characteristics, the anicca, dukkha, anatta, which help to give us an insight into the nature of the phenomena that are passing through our minds, but also through the world, through the realm of conditioned existence. So there was a famous story, there was a sutta in one of the Nikayas where the Buddha's assistant, Ananda, is meeting with the monks. They're in some kind of outdoor meeting, and the monks are talking about the wonderful, marvellous qualities of the Tathagata. Now the Tathagata is the Buddha. That was the epithet he used about himself. And Ananda's sort of being very enthusiastic. He's saying to these younger monks, yes, there are many wonderful and marvellous qualities to the Tathagata. And then he starts to describe what these qualities are. And he goes into all these kind of miraculous qualities. Well, the Tathagata went up to the Tusita heaven. This is before coming down to be future Buddha. The Bodhisattva went to the Tusita heaven. He stayed in the Tusita heaven. He came down from the Tusita heaven and entered his mother's womb. And when he entered the womb, there was immeasurable light through 10,000 world systems, and the earth or the world systems quaked, and so on and so forth. And it says when the Bodhisattva came forth from his mother's womb, she gave birth not like other women after 9 months, but after exactly 10 months. And when he came forth from the womb, there were gods there to receive him. And he landed on his feet and he walked up and down. And that his mother gave birth to him, not like other women, but in a standing posture. And also there were the heavenly beings arranged for 2 spouts of water to come down and bathe the future Buddha, so on and so forth. So it goes on like this. And so the Buddha's listening to all this, and then he says, and Ananda, that being so, you can add one other marvellous and wonderful quality of the Tathagata. And Ananda says, yes, Lord. And so the Buddha says, this particular quality is that the Tathagata can witness the arising and the manifestation and the passing away of feelings, the arising, the passing away and disappearance of perceptions, the arising, passing away and disappearance of thoughts. This is another wonderful and marvellous quality of the Tathagata. In other words, he's talking about impermanence and understanding or seeing into impermanence, which we too can do if we bring our investigative faculties to bear on what's going on inside of ourselves. So I hope this hasn't sounded too highfalutin, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Four Noble Truths. They are at the heart of the Buddha's teaching. As I say, when we have managed to let go, we can feel a lightness. There is a brightness there, and it can be recognised. And what about the path leading to the cessation of dukkha? Well, this is the Noble Eightfold Path, which I'm not going to go into in detail, but it's about, when we talk about the path, it's how to bring the path into our own, somehow incorporate it into our own lives. So if you ever want to study what this Noble Eightfold Path is about, you can try to incorporate it into your own existence. contemplate how to live in the light of the Noble Eightfold Path. So I just sort of thought I would look at the Four Noble Truths, and I'd also like to look at one or two of the questions that have come my way. Someone's written about the who am I exercise. When I was doing this exercise, who am I found that the I is indeed very impermanent and changing. Could you please offer any other suggestions or exercises to train the not-self attitude? I would be grateful for any comments. So all I can say here is that very useful contemplation is to ask yourself who is experiencing whatever you're going through. So we were talking about overpowering emotions earlier today, so you can ask yourself if this is going on for you, an overpowering emotion, who is experiencing this grief or this anger or this jealousy or this whatever it is, you know. So when it can be very overpowering when we get these very strong emotions, but start questioning who's experiencing it. And even if you're not experiencing an overpowering emotion, you can ask yourself questions like, who's sitting here? Who's sitting here? Or who's walking down the corridor? Or who's going to have breakfast? These are useful questions to ask ourselves. So, dear Ajahn, could you at some point mention or give a few words on the Buddhist attitude to the meaning of life? In the current modern way of living, we hear a lot about finding the one or finding happiness. What is the Buddhist's view? And then secondly, could you say a few words about enjoyment or pleasure? When I eat my food, look at something beautiful, am I supposed to deconstruct the experience? Do monastics not experience pleasure, sadness, and other bigger emotions? So, the meaning of life, it sounds like Monty Python, doesn't it? Or coming up with a philosophy. For example, if you're a Christian, maybe you're told God has a plan for you. There is a design which you need to fulfill. And the Buddha's teaching isn't like that. He's talking more about what is your experience right now, you know, and he's pointing to the possibility of dukkha and the other things that I've been talking about. So whoever wrote this says we talk about finding the one or finding happiness. Yes, you know, that it's not wrong to find a partner or to look for happiness, but the point is, if one isn't aware of how things work, in grasping at something, for example, we were talking earlier today about certain kinds of relationships. And so if you go into a relationship and there's a lot of grasping there, or projection, or whatever, eventually that relationship will come, that some change will occur, and you'll perhaps look at the person in a different way because you haven't been very realistic in your initial appraisal of them. And you may think, well, happiness lies out there. If I can have a little cottage by the sea, and there'll be a vine on the door, and a little motorcycle outside the cottage, then I'll be happy. But things will change, something will happen. You'll get ill, or the motorcycle will take you into an accident or something. So happiness isn't necessarily out there. This is what the world is telling us, isn't it? Particularly, I think, the modern world. We're constantly being told to be dissatisfied, to be discontented. And out there is something that will fulfill that need. And this seems to be becoming more and more the case. So when I was younger, I never saw people walking around with t-shirts or trousers advertising products. People, had clothing that was free of this kind of description. But now I notice, particularly on the Sunday when people come to the monastery, I notice young people. There was a young lad the other month, and it said his t-shirt or his shirt, which was pink, said "Fly Emirates," and then the trousers said something else, a logo on the trousers. So I thought, well, this is surely the complete victory of the corporate culture. They get us to buy the garment, walk around advertising their wares, and we think we're cool. And then the second question is about enjoyment or pleasure. Well, I suppose if you hear the teachings that I've been talking about, you might think, well, pleasure is bad or it's completely wrong. But no, pleasure happens just like pain happens. And we can enjoy it, but do we attach to it? That's the question. If we attach to the pleasure, that will take us to pain. But can we just appreciate the pleasure in the moment and let go of it, not expecting anything more from it than actually is there? And with pain, if we try to push pain away all the time, that's a kind of grasping too. So it's experiencing both, but not attaching to them, not identifying with them, knowing that both pleasure and pain are part of the human experience. So it's not wrong to enjoy your food at all, or to enjoy a beautiful work of art. But then watch how the mind responds, One day a certain kind of food is delicious, but the next day it's changed. You don't want it anymore. If we cling and we attach in an unskillful way, we experience dukkha. So a very good example of this is, again actually, this cousins I was talking about. The husband of my cousin had a very pleasant father who was wanting to always do the best for his family, for the wider family. So he took them all on a wonderful trip to Florida one year, and they had a most wonderful time. The weather was great, the activities they got into were great, everyone got on with each other. It was like a kind of paradise. And then they flew back to Britain, and it was so wonderful. They were determined to go back to Florida again. And as soon as he could, he got them back to Florida, and everything had changed. The weather was dreadful, the activities didn't work out, people didn't get on, and so on. It's a good example of clinging to something. Some of these will be a bit too long, so I won't go into them. So just a brief, someone said here, can you share with us how you came to become a monk and why? So I'll just give you a brief one on this. So it wasn't that I set out to be a religious kind of a person. I wasn't even aware of having any spiritual seeking in my psyche. But I went to Thailand as a volunteer teacher, and I lived with Thai people for a while, and I guess that would have sowed some seeds here, because I very much appreciated certain things about Thailand. I'm not going to say Thailand's a perfect society, far from it, but there were things about Thai life that I very much appreciated as against particularly British life. But I was only interested in sort of conventional and what you might call secular things at that stage. But a few years later I met, through a Thai student, I was teaching in a hospital, I met some monks, and there was one Paul Samedo and other monks at a kind of little celebration. It was the opening of a particular, called the opening of a garage, because a monk was going to go and live in this garage. So it was I was lured to the meeting by the promise of a Thai meal, which is what motivated me. I thought, well, I can put up with some monks. It's a Thai meal. So that's when I saw Ajahn Sumedho, I saw the other monks, and I was very impressed with their appearance. So it was a longish process, but I went on a retreat of 10 days, that's all you could do in those days. Started to practice, and eventually became an anagarika for a while, then went back to the lay life, and finally came back again, became an anagarika again, and finally a monk. So there was no instant conversion, but that was the process for me. Just off the top of the head, are there any questions or points that anyone would like to make? You're welcome to come up with something. Do you have any?
What did you teach in Thailand?
Well, I was teaching in a school called Bangkapi School, which was on the edge of Bangkok at that stage, and surprise, surprise, I was teaching English.
How do you distinguish between knowing if it's helpful thoughts that arise, an insight arises during meditation, or a kind of perpetual thought? We were talking about that, a thought that arises that we look into the future, it could be an ideal or something. How do you differentiate between knowing what might be a real insight or something useful, or just another thought?
I think it's a very different feel to these thoughts. There are, you might call, habitual thoughts that come up, and a lot of it's about energy, the energy coming from us, from the body, or about desire, about fantasies and projections, planning, and all the rest of it. But every now and then, if you contemplate something, you can get an insight, which is kind of liberating. It's about somehow you've let go of something, and you become a bit freer through the insight. So you've seen a connection, maybe, or you've identified something as being the cause of something else, or the source of a kind of suffering in yourself. A kind of like an insight into a kind of holding on. Of course, we can get false insights. We only know in the end, as things play out, whether that insight was correct. But I think it has a very different feel to it to the average thought. It's more like, oh really? It's sort of you step back from it. You see something. Wow, that's very special. Or I didn't realise that. It opens your eyes to something. Whereas a lot of the time we have these thoughts that hammer on and on and on, and they're just sort of repetitive, and I want this and I want that, and that should happen. I was once on a retreat at Bepton. This was another Easter retreat, and there were various other seniors, if you like, or lay people who had much more experience than I did. And one of them, called Robert, he liked to use the tea time sometimes to talk about, he's quite an introverted guy, so this was a kind of release for him. He would talk to us about what was going on with his meditation. And he said something like this. He said that he was aware that there was something there's kind of a pain here, there was something wrong here. And so he kept, as he calmed the mind down, he would go down and investigate in the area of the stomach, of the abdomen and so on. And eventually what he identified, he said, and saw, was that there was a knife there. There was a knife in his stomach. And he related that to the death of his mother. And he said that what had happened was that when his mother died, he had not been able to grieve. So he identified this, as he put it, a knife in his stomach. So he was able to start working with that. That was a major insight for him. So we can get small insights and maybe bigger insights. into what's going on for us. So maybe we can go to Ajahn to close the evening. So, shall we go to Reflections on the Sharing of Blessings, which is page 33. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that rises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life, and may they soon attain the threefold bliss, and realize the deathless, through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nirvana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge, unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble Lord, the Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled. So we'll be meeting tomorrow at 5:30, so wish you a good night. The Lord, perfectly enlightened and blessed one, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching, so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. And the Blessed One's disciples, who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha.